Ever since my daughter-in-law came into my life, peace packed its bags and left my house. She's a drama queen, the kind who thrives on chaos and somehow always manages to drag everyone else into it. Her favorite hobby, turning my calm, ordinary days into a storm of noise and trouble. But I'm not a foolish mother-in-law who just stands by and lets her do whatever she wants. Oh no, I've got my own way of dealing with her. So stay with me in today's story, and you'll see exactly how I handled my troublemaker daughter-in-law. And before we begin, I'd love to know where my dear viewers are listening from. Leave a comment below to tell me. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video to support my channel. The sound of shattering glass cut through the quiet morning like a scream. I didn't flinch. The windshield of my car glittered across the driveway, tiny diamonds under the Charleston sun. Nina, my daughter-in-law, stood there trembling, her voice cracking as she shouted accusations that echoed off the stone walls. She said I had stolen from her, that I had reached into her handbag and taken her jewelry. Her hands shook as she held up her phone, threatening to call the police. I simply looked at her and let her words fall apart in the air. My heart didn't even race anymore. It had learned too well the rhythm of lies. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my own phone, and with one steady motion opened the photo. It was the picture I had taken yesterday at the mall when she thought I wasn't watching. Her manicured fingers slipping the small velvet pouch into my purse while smiling for the store clerk. I turned the screen toward her. My voice came out calm but firm, like the tide before a storm. I already sent this to the police, Nina. The color drained from her face. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She stepped back, then her knees gave in. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered beside the broken glass. For a second, there was nothing but the sound of her shallow breathing and the faint hum of cicadas in the garden. I didn't move to help her. There was nothing left to say, and certainly nothing left to save. The woman who had called me a thief in front of my neighbors was now crouched on the ground, clutching her chest, realizing that her performance had ended. I could already hear sirens in the distance. Officer Max Randall was on his way along with Peter Sinclair, my attorney. They would arrive soon, just as I had planned. I looked down at Nina one last time. Her eyes darted between me and the photo still glowing on my screen. The same calm that had once been mistaken for weakness now became my armor. For years, she'd tried to humiliate me. Today, she ran out of stage. When the police car finally turned into the driveway, the flashing lights painted the white walls in shades of red and blue. Nina covered her face, crying, but the sound no longer carried any power. I stood by my car, quiet, composed, the broken glass at my feet, reflecting the truth that could no longer be hidden. When people look at me, they usually see a calm, old woman who likes her garden and her morning coffee by the window. What they don't see is the spine I've built through decades of standing on my own. My name is Krista Dalton. I'm 65, a widow for nearly 10 years, and for most of my life, I was an accountant at an insurance company in Ohio. I've always believed that money tells the truth about people. It doesn't lie, and it never forgets who respected it. I worked quietly, saved carefully, and when my husband passed away, I promised myself one thing: I would never depend on anyone again. The house I live in now, a 2-story brick home in Cleveland Heights, isn't grand, but it's mine. Every nail, every flower in the front yard, every tax bill is paid by me and carries only my name. I still remember the day I made the final mortgage payment. I stood in the kitchen holding the receipt and whispered to myself that freedom sometimes looks like a simple piece of paper. In this neighborhood, people wave politely. Children ride their bikes past my white picket fence, and the mailman knows I always tip him cookies at Christmas. It's quiet here, and I like it that way. My days follow a rhythm I've made for myself. Mornings start with pruning roses or reading the newspaper over black coffee. Afternoons are for the local book club or sometimes a walk through Kane Park. And Saturdays are special. That's when Mallory, my youngest daughter, comes home for dinner. She brings laughter, new gossip, and sometimes leftover desserts from her cafe. When she sits at my table, it almost feels like the old days before life became so complicated. I've never been one for luxury, but I take pride in stability. I've seen too many people lose themselves chasing comfort or approval. My rule has always been simple: help your children, but never let them rule your life. It's a line many parents blur, but I've drawn it deep in stone. I raised my daughters to stand tall, not to lean on others. Still lately, I've felt that not everyone in this family understands that principle, especially my eldest son's wife, Nina. There's something sharp beneath her smile, something that watches me too closely whenever family matters or property come up. I tell myself not to assume the worst, yet a mother's instinct rarely lies. Brent has always been the kind of man who sees the good in everyone. Even as a boy, he was gentle, trusting the type who believed every apology was sincere. At 37, not much had changed. He worked as a software engineer in Cleveland, quiet and steady, someone who preferred fixing code to fixing conflict. People called him dependable. I called him my son. Yet lately, I could barely recognize him. The man who once called me every Sunday now went silent for weeks. When Brent met Nina Harrington, I saw that familiar sparkle of pride in his eyes. She came from Chicago, a polished young woman from a family with connections and money. She carried herself like someone who expected doors to open before she even reached them. Brent was smitten, and I didn't interfere. Every mother wants her son to be happy. But when he said she was good for his stability, my stomach tightened. Stability to Brent had always meant emotional safety. To Nina, it meant financial comfort. After their wedding, the distance between us grew like ivy, on old brick, slow, quiet, and suffocating. Phone calls became short visits, rare. When I did see them, Nina's smiles were sweet, but rehearsed, her tone dipped in politeness, yet sharp underneath. She often sighed about how I didn't seem to accept her, how she felt unwelcome. Brent would glance at me, torn his brow, creased in that helpless way I had seen since he was little. He wanted peace, not truth. And she knew exactly how to use that. One evening, Brent called, his voice uncertain but hopeful. He said Nina had an idea. They wanted me to move into their new house, a beautiful villa on the edge of town. He said it would be easier for everyone, no more driving, no more loneliness, family together under one roof. His words sounded loving, even generous. I could hear Nina laughing softly in the background, whispering something he thought I couldn't catch. I remember smiling into the phone, pretending to think about it. But inside, I knew that kind of invitation rarely comes without a price. Brent believed he was bridging gaps, building harmony. He didn't see that he was being steered like a ship in calm waters that were already charted by someone else. He thought he was taking care of his mother. In truth, he was walking me straight into Nina's game. Nina Harrington was the kind of woman who could walk into any room and make people believe she belonged there. At 33, she had the kind of beauty that photographs well, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. The daughter of a wealthy real estate investor from Chicago, she had grown up in a world where mistakes were erased with money and applause followed entitlement. She had never worked a day in her life that wasn't about appearances, hosting charity luncheons, curating designer wardrobes, or posting perfect smiles online. When she married Brent Dalton, she didn't just take his name. She took the stage that came with it. With her parents' money and Brent's credit cards, Nina purchased a sprawling villa on the edge of Columbus, White marble floors, imported chandeliers, a garden no one ever walked in. She called it the Dalton Estate, as if the title itself could rewrite history. Brent, ever the gentle soul, thought she was building a home for them. But I knew better. The moment she said, "We're family now, and I want us all together," I heard the leash being fastened. She often repeated that we should live close to take care of each other. To Brent, it sounded sweet, filial, even generous. To me, it sounded like surveillance. Every visit to her house felt like entering a set flowers, perfectly arranged dinner table, lit just so her laughter carefully timed. She played the role of the perfect daughter-in-law with precision cooking, when guests were present, flattering Brent in public, calling me Mom, in a tone just a little too smooth. But beneath the politeness, there was calculation. Nina's eyes never stopped measuring. It didn't take long before she began talking about streamlining the family's assets. She told Brent that my old house in Cleveland Heights was too much for me to manage, that selling it and merging the funds would be a smart financial move. Brent nodded, trusting her every word. But I had spent 30 years in finance. I knew exactly how inheritance law worked. The house was mine alone, paid in full, protected by my name and my late husband's will. I smiled when she mentioned selling it and simply said, "A wise woman keeps one roof she can always return to." That answer didn't please her. I saw the flicker of irritation cross her face before she masked it with a smile. From that day on, Nina's tone changed, still polite, still sugary, but laced with challenge. She wasn't used to anyone saying no, least of all a mother-in-law she thought she could outsmart. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about property. It was about power. When I first moved into the Harrington Dalton villa, it felt less like joining a family and more like checking into a system. The house was beautiful. I won't deny that gleaming marble floors, quiet hallways, the faint scent of lavender from diffusers placed in every corner. But beneath the polish was control. The front door had an electronic lock that only Nina managed. Cameras blinked discreetly in the corners, watching every step. Even the cleaning staff and gardener were hired through her connections. Everyone answered to Nina, not to Brent, and certainly not to me. Within a week, the rhythm of the house changed. Nina created a family schedule, a glossy spreadsheet printed and pinned to the refrigerator. Breakfast at 8 Hazara, yoga at 9 Hazara, lunch, strictly low-carb, lights out by 10. I had spent 40 years running my own household, but here I suddenly felt like a guest in my own life. Mallory lasted 3 days before rolling her eyes and escaping back to her apartment in the city. I stayed partly out of pride, partly out of curiosity. I wanted to see just how far Nina's performance would go. Her way of control was never loud, it was polished, wrapped in silk. She brought me gifts, scented candles, cashmere scarves, a new handbag I didn't need. One afternoon, she surprised me with a spa day. "You deserve to relax, Mom," she said sweetly, as we sat in a waiting room that smelled of eucalyptus. She snapped a picture when I wasn't looking. By evening, it was on social media with the caption, "Spa day with my lovely mother-in-law. Family time is everything." The comments poured in heart emojis, compliments, people calling her the perfect daughter-in-law. Every act of kindness was another layer of image building. She didn't care if I was comfortable, only that I looked like I adored her. The house became her stage, every moment curated for the public eye. When I walked through the kitchen one evening, I found my favorite teacup replaced by a matching set Nina ordered online. When I tried to move the vase of roses from my late husband's table to the window, she moved it back the next day, saying the lighting was better for her photos. Slowly, space stopped belonging to me. Even silence wasn't mine anymore. It hummed with the faint buzz of surveillance cameras. Brent didn't see it. To him, Nina was thoughtful, organized, devoted. To me, she was a queen, ruling a quiet empire built on charm and control. I realized then that her greatest weapon wasn't cruelty, it was presentation. It started with little things, subtle, almost invisible cracks in what Nina called family harmony. Mallory was the first to notice. My daughter had always been spirited, confident, someone who could read a room in seconds. But after moving closer to us, she began to shrink in her own skin. Nina had opinions about everything: Mallory's clothes, her work schedule, even her boyfriend Tyler. One evening over dinner, Nina smiled sweetly and said that Tyler didn't look ambitious enough to match the Dalton name. The table went quiet. Brent tried to laugh it off, but Mallory's hands trembled as she set down her fork. That night, she told me she didn't think her sister-in-law wanted a family. She wanted an empire. At first, I told myself Nina's behavior came from insecurity, not malice. But the pattern was too precise to ignore. She needed control the way others needed air. It wasn't enough for her to manage her own image. She had to manage everyone else's, too. She planned our dinners, approved, our guests corrected our words. I noticed how her tone shifted whenever Brent and I shared a private moment, a mother's advice, a small laugh from old memories. Nina would glide into the room with a smile so polished it almost gleamed. Yet her eyes gave her away. They were watchful, cold, as if measuring how much affection Brent still owed his mother. Sometimes she'd make little comments that stung more than insults. "When Mom gets older, we'll take care of everything," she'd say, casually reaching for Brent's hand. On the surface, it sounded caring. But the way she said it, like a declaration of ownership, made my stomach tighten. I could feel myself being quietly moved from family to responsibility. Brent didn't see it. He thought she was being thoughtful. But I'd seen this type of control before. I used to audit families who fought over estates. There was always one person who hid greed behind affection. And Nina played that role flawlessly. The tension in the house became a constant hum. Mallory avoided coming over. Brent grew quieter. Even the air felt heavy, as if our walls absorbed every unspoken resentment. Still, Nina's online life painted perfection. Smiling photos, captions about love, endless praise from strangers who had no idea what it was like to live under her rules. I began writing things down. At first, it was just to clear my head notes about what she said when she moved my things, how she treated Mallory. But soon it became something else, a habit, a defense. Each page in that small notebook felt like reclaiming a piece of my clarity. I didn't know then that it would later become my most powerful weapon. Within a few weeks, the mask began to slip. Nina's obsession with control no longer hid behind politeness. It had turned into a daily routine disguised as care. One morning over breakfast, she placed a neat binder on the table, labeled Family Wellness Schedule. Inside were printed charts for everyone, me, Brent, even Mallory. She explained with her signature sweet smile that it was to keep the household organized. Every activity had a slot: wake-up time, meal times, vitamins, chores. She even wrote down when I should take my blood pressure medication. "It helps me make sure you're healthy, Mom," she said. But it didn't feel like love. It felt like surveillance. She wanted copies of my medical appointments, the phone number of my doctor, and the spare key to my bedroom just in case. I handed her a duplicate I had already disabled. She didn't notice. I smiled. Let her believe she held all the keys. Mallory wasn't spared either. Nina demanded that she text whenever she left work, whenever she got home, even when she met friends. When Mallory protested, Nina acted wounded, saying, "I just worry about you like a real sister." But her version of worry always came with a hidden demand. The staff fared no better. Within a month, 3 housekeepers had quit. Nina said they didn't follow protocol. In truth, she couldn't stand anyone who didn't treat her like a queen. The remaining staff whispered among themselves, moving carefully, as if afraid to breathe too loudly. The atmosphere in the house became tense, almost clinical. The sound of laughter disappeared, replaced by polite conversations measured by her presence. Everyone watched their words, afraid she might twist them later. And she often did. Brent would come home from work, and Nina would meet him at the door with a practiced sigh. "I'm trying my best, but your mother seems distant lately." Or Mallory was a little rude this morning. Brent would listen confused, torn between the wife he adored and the family he was slowly losing. In the evenings, when the lights dimmed and the cameras hummed quietly in their corners, I sat by my window with my notebook. Every word, every manipulation went into it. I wasn't just documenting a household, I was tracing the anatomy of control. And though she thought she ruled this house, I was already studying her patterns, learning how to reclaim what was mine. It happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those quiet hours when the sun had barely climbed over the hedges. I was making coffee when Nina's scream shattered the calm. Her voice echoed down the hall, sharp, urgent, rehearsed. "My diamond bracelet. It's gone!" I rushed toward her room, Brent following behind me, half awake. Nina stood near her dresser, hand clutching her chest, eyes wide in perfect performance. Then her gaze locked on me. "You were the only one who came into my room yesterday. Weren't you, Mom?" Her tone was soft, but each word landed like a small knife. I froze, cup still in my hand. "I left your laundry at the door," I said evenly. "I didn't go in." But she was already shaking her head, tears welling up. Brent stepped forward, trying to calm her. The staff gathered in silence. By noon, the housekeeper was gone, fired on the spot for negligence. No one mentioned the cameras, though I had seen them, tiny eyes blinking in every corner of this house. Later, I checked the footage quietly. There she was, Nina herself, walking to the car with the bracelet tucked neatly in her purse. I said nothing. Not yet. That day marked a shift. From then on, every smile carried tension. Every gesture felt weighed. Mallory stopped speaking freely at the table. I noticed how she'd glance at Nina before answering even simple questions. We both learned the same lesson in this house: one wrong word could be turned into a weapon. Nina had a way of twisting small moments into stories of victimhood. If I forgot to reply to a text, she would sigh dramatically, telling Brent I was still struggling to accept her. If Mallory missed a family brunch, Nina would whisper, "She doesn't like me, but I'm trying." Soon, Nina's narrative became the truth Brent lived by. She painted herself as the patient daughter-in-law, so kind, so misunderstood. To outsiders, she was flawless. On social media, she posted captions like, "Some relationships take time, but love always wins." I couldn't help but notice that the photo always showed her holding my hand, not me holding hers. Behind closed doors, the kindness evaporated. Nina spoke in commands softened by honeyed tones. "Mom, maybe you should rest more, let us handle things," or, "You seem tired, I'll keep your jewelry safe for now." Each offer carried a hidden lock. That night, I wrote 3 words in my notebook. "She's rehearsing sympathy." And deep down, I understood the bracelet was never the point. It was just Act 1. It happened on a gray afternoon when the air in the house felt heavier than usual. I had packed a small suitcase, just clothes and a few books. I told Nina quietly that I wanted to spend a few days at my old house. "I miss my tulip garden," I said, smiling softly. It was the kind of sentence meant to end conversations, not start wars. But Nina froze. Her lips tightened, her voice sharp as broken glass. "So my care isn't good enough for you," she said. "You'd rather be alone in that old place than stay here where we're trying to help you." I tried to calm her, to explain that I simply needed space. But her eyes had that familiar glint, the one that appeared whenever she felt her control slipping. Brent wasn't home. The house was silent, except for the sound of the clock ticking in the hallway. I lifted my bag and walked toward the staircase. The air behind me shifted. I heard her footsteps, fast, uneven. Then came the shove. It wasn't hard enough to look deliberate, but strong enough to send me tumbling. The world spun. My shoulder struck the railing. My leg twisted beneath me, and pain shot through my wrist. When I hit the floor, everything blurred into sound, the sharp cry of Nina, the thud of my suitcase, the faint hum of the cameras that somehow missed the angle of the stairs. She rushed down, tears already streaming her voice, trembling with perfect panic. "Oh my God, Mom." She fell. She just lost her balance. The paramedics arrived within minutes. I remember the smell of disinfectant, the bright light from the ambulance roof, and Nina's voice explaining everything before anyone could ask. "She's been a bit unsteady lately," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I told her not to carry heavy things, but she's so independent." Every word carefully chosen, dripping with sincerity. At the hospital, they confirmed what I already felt: the bones in my leg and wrist were fractured. Painkillers dulled the physical ache, but not the one twisting inside me. Officer Max Randall visited that evening, polite and professional. He asked if I remembered what happened. I hesitated, then said I wasn't sure. I saw the faint relief in Nina's eyes as she stood nearby, clutching a tissue like a prop. The report called it a domestic accident. No evidence of a push, no charges, just another elderly woman who lost balance. I knew better, but I also knew that patience could be more powerful than accusation. Sometimes justice begins with silence and a plan. When I returned from the hospital, the house looked like a set prepared for a redemption story. The flowers in the living room had been replaced with fresh tulips, my tulips from the old house. Nina greeted me at the door, eyes swollen from tears, arms open wide. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered, as if the words themselves were sacred. For a moment, I almost believed her. She pulled out my chair at the dining table, brought me soup she claimed to have cooked herself, and fluttered around me with the energy of a saint. Every few minutes she'd say something like, "I'll never forgive myself for what happened," her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed, but not fake. Brent, exhausted from work and guilt, looked at her with relief. "See, Mom, she really wants to make things right." He didn't notice the camera she had set up on the counter angled perfectly to capture her wiping my table, fluffing my pillows, or brushing my hair with exaggerated tenderness. Later that evening, those very clips appeared online with captions like "Family first" and "Love heals everything." The comments were endless hearts, praises, strangers calling her the perfect daughter-in-law. I watched it quietly, the taste of irony sharper than the medicine I had to take every 6 hours. Over the next few days, Nina's kindness became a performance schedule. She insisted on managing my meals, my medication, even my mail. She sat beside me during therapy sessions, holding my hand for the camera, then whispering instructions to the nurse when she thought I couldn't hear. She shouldn't move around too much, she'd say sweetly, as if I were a fragile antique. I wanted to laugh. The woman who once pushed me down the stairs now dictated when I could walk. Her newfound humility wasn't repentance, it was strategy. One night, I overheard her crying softly in Brent's office, saying she didn't deserve forgiveness, but wanted to prove her love. By morning, Brent had adjusted the family's financial access, granting her control of the household account to ease her burden. She thanked him, eyes glistening, and hugged him tightly, while glancing briefly in my direction, a silent victory. Online, her narrative grew stronger. Each post painted her as the gentle savior of a difficult household, a young woman enduring criticism, yet choosing love. And I, the supposed difficult mother-in-law, became the unspoken villain in her story, the one redeemed only by her grace. But I wasn't angry anymore. I had learned something in that hospital bed. People like Nina always write their own scripts, and they never imagine someone else is quietly taking notes. Everyone thought the fall had broken me. I let them believe it. I moved slowly through the house, leaning on my cane, speaking softly, smiling when Nina hovered near me with her false tenderness. She thought I was fading too weak to challenge her anymore. In truth, I was watching, listening, writing. Every whisper, every carefully disguised threat, every late-night argument she staged for sympathy, I recorded them all. I kept a notebook on my nightstand, each page dated and time-stamped. Notes about her tone, her words, even her pauses. It wasn't anger that guided me anymore, it was precision. I began making small audio recordings on my phone, short clips, no longer than a minute each. I labeled them quietly. June 4th, staircase argument. June 7th, medication comment. When the house was empty, I'd send them through a private email to my old friend, Peter Sinclair, a lawyer I had known since the years after my husband passed. Peter was the one who had helped me untangle the finances, the one man I trusted to understand both law and silence. He called me one evening after listening to the first set of recordings. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Krista," he said, "you need to stay patient. Don't confront her. Let her think she's winning. We'll build this the right way. Evidence logs, time-stamped notes, medical records. Everything documented. That's how the law protects you." I sat there in my dimly lit room, looking at the faint reflection of myself in the window. My hand still trembled when I wrote, but my mind felt sharper than it had in months. "You think she'll slip?" I asked. "She already has," Peter replied. "You're just learning to catch it." After that call, I slept better. Each day became an act of quiet endurance. I smiled for the cameras, accepted Nina's staged affection, thanked her in front of Brent. But behind the politeness, my resolve grew stronger. I saved receipts, took photos of my medication doses, even printed copies of her online posts. I knew what she was doing, crafting a story where she was the saint, and I was the fragile relic of a generation too proud to adapt. But this wasn't just family tension anymore. This was about truth, about law, about dignity. And if there's one thing I've learned in 65 years, it's that patience can be the sharpest blade of all. It was a bright Saturday morning when Nina suggested we go out. "You've been cooped up for too long, Mom," she said with that perfect smile. "A little shopping will lift your spirits." 2 months after the fall, I was still using a wheelchair, my leg in a brace. Brent thought the idea was lovely. "You two need time together," he said, and I agreed, even though something in my chest whispered caution. We drove to a luxury shopping center in Columbus, the kind of place where glass sparkles like ice and every store smells faintly of money. Nina parked in the VIP section, greeted the valet by name, and pushed my wheelchair smoothly through the marble-floored hallways. Her perfume was sweet, sharp, deliberate. She kept talking, small talk, surface-level sweetness, while her eyes flicked from corner to corner, noting every security camera, every sales associate's position. I could tell she was studying the room, not enjoying it. She led me into a jewelry boutique lined with mirrors and velvet counters. "Let's find something for Mother's Day," she said cheerfully. "Something that truly represents you." I laughed softly, unsure how to respond. The young clerk approached eager and polite and began showing us trays of diamonds and gold. Nina leaned forward, asking to see one piece after another, her hands moving with elegant precision. Then I noticed the brief hesitation, the calculated glance toward my bag on the side of my wheelchair. She picked up a pair of diamond earrings, admired them, then shifted slightly, blocking the clerk's view. With her other hand, she palmed a small bracelet from the tray and lowered both pieces into the folds of my handbag. It was quick, graceful even, the kind of move that would look innocent to anyone watching. "Mom, what do you think of these?" she asked brightly, holding up another necklace, as if nothing had happened. My heart gave a slow, heavy thud. I said nothing. I only looked at her reflection in the mirror behind the counter. Her expression was flawless, warm, loving, glowing with pride. To the world, she was the perfect daughter-in-law, taking her elderly mother shopping. When she wheeled me out of the boutique, she waved cheerfully to the staff. "We'll think about it," she said. Her tone was light, but I could see the satisfaction flicker in her eyes. She was setting the stage. And this time, I knew exactly what she was doing. When we got home that evening, the house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I set my handbag on the table, ready to put away my things. That was when I saw it, a small velvet jewelry box wedged between my wallet and a folded scarf. It wasn't mine. My breath caught for a second, but instead of panic, a cold clarity filled me. Years in accounting had taught me one rule: when something doesn't add up, it's because someone wants it that way. I opened the box carefully. Inside were a diamond bracelet and a pair of earrings, both from the same store we had visited. I remembered how Nina had insisted on pushing the wheelchair close to the counter, how she'd adjusted my bag more than once, how her eyes had followed the clerk's every move. My gut tightened. It was too neat, too planned. I didn't call her name. I didn't accuse. Instead, I made tea and waited until she went upstairs to take a shower. Then I took out my phone and called the boutique. "Good evening," I said calmly. "This is Krista Dalton. I believe there's been a mistake with a purchase earlier today." The manager recognized my name immediately. I'd been a loyal customer for years, ever since my husband was alive. "Of course, Mrs. Dalton," she said. "Would you like to bring it back tomorrow?" "I'd prefer to handle it now," I replied, keeping my voice level. "And as per your store's loss prevention policy, I'd like to review the security footage, just to ensure there's been no misunderstanding." There was a pause on the line, then her tone softened. "Of course, we'll arrange it." Within an hour, I was back at the store with my old friend, the manager herself, beside me in the surveillance room. We watched the video in silence. It showed everything: Nina leaning in, smiling, chatting with the clerk, and in one smooth movement, slipping the small box into my handbag while pretending to adjust the strap. My hands didn't even twitch. The proof was undeniable. The manager exhaled, whispering, "That's deliberate." I nodded, my heartbeat steady. "Keep a copy of that footage," I said quietly, "and please note the time and date. I'll handle the rest." Walking out of the store, the evening air felt colder but cleaner. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was intent, malicious, premeditated, and punishable. And if Nina thought she could trap me with my own decency, she was about to learn that I had been documenting numbers and evidence long before she ever learned to lie. The day after confirming the truth at the jewelry store, I knew emotions alone would not save me. Only evidence would. So I called a licensed private investigation firm in Ohio, one that Peter Sinclair had once recommended to a client years ago. I spoke calmly, outlining everything from the staircase fall to the planted jewelry. "I don't want revenge," I told the investigator. "I just need proof, clear, lawful proof." Within 48 hours, a man named Daniel Briggs came to my house. Mid-40s, quiet eyes, the kind of person who listens more than he speaks. He explained how the process worked: 3 weeks of discreet surveillance, full documentation, all under Ohio's private investigation regulations. His tone was steady, reassuring. I signed the contract, my signature neat and deliberate. For the first time in months, I felt like I had taken back a fragment of control. Daniel and his team installed a small legal body camera in the jacket of one of their undercover assistants, posing as a delivery man who visited our street twice a week. They also placed a tiny hidden camera in the potted plant by our front door, its lens no larger than a pinhead. I watched them test it, ensuring the angle covered the porch and driveway, without invading anyone's privacy. It was all by the book, clean, professional, admissible. By the end of the first week, the recordings started coming in. One afternoon, the footage showed Nina storming out of the house, throwing her handbag into the yard, then shouting into her phone, "Someone's been through my things again." Minutes later, she picked up the same bag, looked around, and marched back inside as if nothing had happened. Another clip captured her on a video call with a friend, pacing in her office, voice dripping with drama. "I'll expose her," she said. "Everyone will see who she really is. It'll make a perfect story for my channel." Daniel delivered each file with precision, labeled time-stamped, and accompanied by a notarized affidavit confirming authenticity. The evidence log included still images, audio transcripts, and summaries of each day's observations. Everything was legally sealed, ready to be presented if I ever needed to go to the police or court. When I looked through the folder that night, I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation, quiet, cold, solid. She wasn't just manipulative. She was manufacturing stories, building lies, as if they were episodes of her own performance. But now her performance had an audience she didn't know existed, and every frame was time-stamped in truth. That night started out like any other quiet, ordinary, almost too peaceful to belong in that house. Mallory had come by after work to drop off groceries and check on me. Nina, all smiles and sweetness, asked if she could borrow Mallory's tablet just to check some work emails. Her tone was casual, polite, practiced. Mallory hesitated for a second, then handed it over. Nina sat in the living room typing for nearly half an hour before setting the device down and heading upstairs to make a phone call. She didn't realize she'd left her digital fingerprints wide open. Later that evening, while cleaning up, Mallory picked up the tablet and noticed a small notification at the top of the screen. It wasn't her email, it was a message alert from one of Nina's group chats. Something about the preview made her stop. She tapped it, and the chat unfolded like a confession. There was Nina laughing in text, sending voice notes and photos to a close friend. "Can't wait to catch her red-handed," one message read. "The old lady will never know what hit her. This clip will go viral for sure." Mallory's heart pounded. She scrolled further. The messages were dated 2 days before the jewelry store incident. There were screenshots of the boutique's interior, a map of the mall, even a photo of the exact jewelry box Nina had planted. Another line made her stomach twist. "Remember to act shocked when I post it. I'll caption it. When your own mother-in-law betrays you, people eat this stuff up. Eat this." For a moment, Mallory couldn't breathe. All the strange tension, all the half-truths, the fake tears, it all clicked into place. Her hands shook as she took screenshots of everything, carefully making sure the timestamps and metadata were visible. She copied the chat log, exported the message file, and locked it into a password-protected folder. The evidence was undeniable. When she came to my room that night, her face was pale but determined. She handed me the tablet wordlessly. I opened the files, and for the first time in months, the fog around me cleared. There it was, the smoking gun, the proof that every cruel thing I had suspected wasn't paranoia, but planning. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was an understanding. Mallory finally said, "She doesn't know yet, does she?" I looked at my daughter and smiled faintly. "No," I said, "and that's exactly how we'll keep it." That night, for the first time, we weren't victims. We were allies. The next morning, I called Peter Sinclair. It had been years since we last spoke. But the sound of his calm, measured voice was exactly as I remembered. Peter wasn't just a lawyer. He had been my husband's closest friend, and the man who guided me through every financial document after the funeral. This time, his role would be different. "Peter," I said quietly, "I think it's time we talk about evidence." He didn't ask for details over the phone. Instead, he invited me to his office in downtown Cleveland, a modest space filled with case files and old family photos. I brought everything: the surveillance footage, the recordings, the screenshots Mallory had found. He watched in silence, eyes narrowing slightly, when Nina appeared on screen, slipping the jewelry box into my bag with practiced ease. When the last clip ended, he leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "You did the right thing, Krista." Peter began outlining the next steps. "We're not filing formal charges yet," he explained. "First, we'll submit an incident report to Officer Max Randall. Nothing more, nothing less. It documents what happened, locks the evidence into record, and lets us see how she reacts once she realizes the police are aware." He spoke like a man playing chess, every move deliberate. I nodded, absorbing every word. "And Brent?" I asked. "Not a word," Peter replied firmly. "You can't risk her twisting the story before we're ready. She's manipulative, but we have something she doesn't: procedure. The law works slowly, but when it moves, it crushes anything built on lies." He then created a digital backup of every file: photos, videos, and transcripts, stored securely in an encrypted cloud folder, accessible only through a dual authentication key. He printed notarized copies and placed them in a sealed envelope, labeling it "Preliminary Evidence, Dalton Case." Before I left, Peter watched the main video again, the one from the jewelry store. Nina's movements were graceful, almost elegant, until the truth revealed itself frame by frame. When the clip ended, he exhaled through his nose a quiet sound that carried both disbelief and resolve. "If she takes one more step," he said, voice low, "but certain we'll have a felony on our hands." I left his office feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. The battle was no longer emotional. It was legal, now structured, deliberate. For the first time, the power wasn't in her performance, it was in the paperwork. And this time, the law was watching. The plan Peter laid out for me felt like a map to a safe house. He called it a 3-tier strategy, and he explained each step with a lawyer's patience. First, observe without interference. Second, record everything with time marks and legal formality. Third, activate the legal response only when the elements of a false accusation are fully met. He said that to win, I must not force her hand nor confront her in anger, but let her make the mistake herself. I nodded and felt the truth of that lesson settle into me. We built a timeline that afternoon, detailed down to likely moments when Nina might act. Peter wanted 30 days of intensive observation. He said patterns emerge like cracks in plaster, and once you see the pattern, you can predict the collapse. I had my notebook, the one with my handwriting neat in ink. We labeled columns: evidence, time, witness, and planned actions. Peter marked dates to check the surveillance logs and set windows to request official reports from the police if needed. Mallory agreed to be our inside person, though I worried for her. Peter explained that Mallory should appear ordinary, the dutiful daughter who calls about recipes or brings a casserole. Mallory would play small roles in Nina's scenes, a presence that made Nina relax and act naturally. In private, she would send encrypted messages to Peter, short notes with attachments, so the investigator could stitch together the larger picture. We practiced signals, little phrases Mallory would say, to show she had information without drawing attention. Peter emphasized evidence integrity. Cameras and audio had to be lawful timestamps, accurate chains of custody, unbroken. He arranged a meeting with Daniel Briggs to review the investigator's logs and notarize transcriptions. He told me to keep my own diary, daily entries signed and dated, because a judge likes to see the continuity of a person's account. I liked the discipline of that. Recording daily life turned fear into work. We also rehearsed patience. Peter reminded me that law moves differently than anger, and that waiting is not weakness. He warned that Nina might try to provoke a scene designed to look like retaliation, but that would help us if we had already recorded her initiation. We discussed the possibility of an incident trigger a moment staged by Nina that could be proven false by our prior logs. The idea felt like waiting for a tide, and I became steady in that watching. At the end of the meeting, Peter placed a sealed copy of the timeline in his safe and printed a duplicate for me. We shook hands like two people making a compact. I left with a strange mixture of calm and resolve. For the first time since the fall, I felt the movement in the house was not random, and that our patient clock was beginning to count down toward justice. I promised myself to move with precision, not with haste or anger anymore. For 2 quiet weeks, the private investigators team shadowed Nina with precision. They used a small FAA-approved drone, the kind allowed for neighborhood surveillance, hovering discreetly above the streets of our gated community. Every movement was logged, every hour documented. Daniel Briggs, the lead detective, said she had routines as predictable as clockwork gym at 9 a.m., cafe selfies at noon, staged family updates in the afternoon. But on the 10th day, the pattern changed, and that was when the truth revealed itself. At exactly 4:17 p.m., the drone captured Nina parking her white SUV behind a supermarket in Columbus. She stepped out, sunglasses on, hair perfectly styled, holding one of her designer handbags, the same one she often flaunted online. She looked around, making sure the area was empty, then placed the bag on the ground beside a trash bin. The camera zoomed in, recording her every move. She adjusted her phone on a small tripod, pressed record, and began her performance. "She did this to me," Nina said, into the lens voice, trembling with fake pain. "My mother-in-law threw away my bag. I just wanted peace, and she wants revenge." Her tears were perfect, controlled cinematic. When the act ended, she glanced at her reflection in the car window, wiped her face, and left the scene. The drone followed as she drove straight home to the Harrington Dalton estate. An hour later, Brent came home from work confused and worried. Nina rushed to him in the foyer, crying again. She threw it away. "Brent," she sobbed. "She took my favorite bag and tossed it into the trash because she hates me." Brent's voice softened, exhausted, falling into the same trap once more. He didn't know the truth was already hovering in the air, recorded from every angle. That evening, Daniel sent the video files to Peter Sinclair's encrypted account. Peter called me within minutes. "Krista," he said, "you need to see this." I opened the footage, and my stomach turned cold. There she was, Nina staging her own heartbreak like a theater actress, directing every tear. There was no doubt, no interpretation needed. She had orchestrated the scene entirely on her own. Peter's tone was calm but sharp. "This is it," he said. "The evidence is clear and time-stamped. We'll file it when the moment's right." For me, it wasn't just proof of guilt. It was revelation. Her lies weren't random. They were scripts, carefully written and rehearsed. And now, for the first time, we had the recording that would unravel every one of them. The next morning, the quiet of the Harrington Dalton house was shattered by the sound of sirens pulling up to the gate. Nina had called the police. She greeted the officers at the door with tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "My designer handbag has been stolen," she said, clutching her chest. "I think my mother-in-law took it." Her tone wavered between pain and righteousness, like a woman trying to sound both victim and brave. Brent appeared moments later, hair disheveled, still in his pajamas. "Nina, this is absurd," he whispered, trying to calm her. But she turned on him sharply. "If you really believe in doing what's right," she said, "then let the police handle it. No more covering for your mother." The officers glanced awkwardly between them, jotting notes into their pads. One of them, Officer Max Randall, the same one who had handled my so-called fall months earlier, kept his expression professional, though I caught the faintest flicker of recognition in his eyes. I sat quietly in the living room, hands folded, my face calm. I had already learned that silence could be stronger than any defense. Nina was pacing, recounting her story with theatrical detail, how she'd discovered the bag, missing how she'd seen me near her closet the day before. Brent tried to interject, but she overrode him at every turn. She's been jealous ever since I tried to help manage the house, Nina told the officers, her voice breaking at the right places. I didn't want to believe it, but there's no other explanation. While the questioning continued, Mallory slipped upstairs, her fingers flying across her phone. Within minutes, every video, every photo, every time-stamped log from the private investigation was securely uploaded and forwarded to Peter Sinclair. When I later checked my messages there, it was a simple text from Mallory sent. He's got everything. Peter didn't rush to interfere. His instructions were clear: let the report be filed. Let Nina's false statement become part of the official record. Once Officer Randall completed the paperwork, Peter would send the evidence package, the drone footage, the metadata, the transcripts directly to the precinct. It was a calculated move to prove not just deceit, but the misuse of police resources, a criminal act under state law. As the officers left, promising to follow up on all leads, Nina exhaled dramatically, leaning into Brent's arms. I just want this over, she whispered, as though exhausted by her own lies. Brent rubbed her shoulder, torn between confusion and loyalty. I watched from my chair, silent but steady. The law had its own rhythm, and Peter was letting her dance right into it. When Officer Max Randall arrived to question me, I played my part exactly as Peter had advised. My hands trembled just enough to look believable. My voice broke when I spoke, and I stumbled over words like someone afraid of saying the wrong thing. I would never take her bag, I murmured, eyes downcast. I'm just so scared everyone will think I did. Randall nodded, expression unreadable, though I noticed the faintest glimmer of understanding in his eyes. He knew the act wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Nina, however, took the bait completely. The more timid I appeared, the bolder she became. That very evening she went online. Her face appeared on screen under soft lighting, eyes red, voice trembling in a practiced rhythm of grief. I never wanted to talk about this, she began, but my mother-in-law, she's not well. She takes things then forgets. It's heartbreaking. The comments poured in sympathy validation followers, praising her kindness and strength. She cried at all the right moments, told stories of forgiveness, and even filmed herself folding laundry with sad piano music in the background. For 3 days, Nina kept posting videos, photos, captions about toxic family healing. Each post gained thousands of likes. She tagged lifestyle pages, mental health advocates, even local influencers. To the public, she was the picture of a young woman burdened by an unstable mother-in-law. But behind that curtain, Max Randall was already watching. Peter had quietly informed him that the evidence package existed and that this was part of a broader setup. Randall agreed to monitor Nina's online activity under the department's cyber documentation policy. Every post, every timestamp, every edit was being logged. Meanwhile, he also reached out to the boutique where Nina claimed to have bought the stolen handbag, requesting their security footage for the same date and time. The loop was closing. Every lie Nina told online was being cross-referenced with real data. At home, I kept my performance steady. I looked tired in public, spoke softly to neighbors, avoided social gatherings. To everyone, I was a fragile woman, overwhelmed by stress. Inside, though, I felt a strange calm. The game had shifted. For months, Nina had written the script. Now, without realizing it, she was acting in mine. Once Nina's complaint officially entered the police record, Peter moved into action with the precision of a surgeon. Within an hour, he submitted the counterfile a complete evidentiary package that included photographs, drone footage, text transcripts, and notarized statements from the private investigator. Every document was properly formatted, time-stamped, and authenticated. He didn't rush or dramatize. He simply followed procedure because he knew that in law patience always outlasts performance. Officer Max Randall reviewed the evidence that same afternoon. It didn't take long for him to see the pattern. The drone videos showed Nina placing her own handbag beside the trash bin, recording herself, and then staging the emotional reaction back at home. The metadata matched the timestamps from her social media posts. When he compared them with her original statement, the inconsistencies were glaring. Randall called Peter later that evening and confirmed what both of us already suspected: Nina's report contained deliberate falsehoods and fabricated evidence, clear signs of a false report and possible obstruction of justice. Peter remained composed. "This is where we stay quiet and let the law breathe," he told me over the phone. "She's already buried herself halfway. We'll let the system finish the rest." Then he requested one more step, a supplemental report. He wanted me to resubmit the medical records from my fall, along with the emergency room notes and physical therapy assessments. "It's time we show the pattern," he said. "The accident wasn't isolated. It's part of her behavior, coercion, manipulation, and calculated harm." That night, I pulled out the old hospital folder I had kept in my desk. Seeing the x-rays again made my stomach tighten. But this time, the pain carried purpose. Mallory helped me scan each page, labeling files clearly. Incident 1, fall injury. Incident 2, false accusation. Peter reviewed everything and merged it into the master case file under the title Pattern of Abuse, Dalton versus Harrington. It was clinical, concise, undeniable. Meanwhile, Nina remained oblivious. She continued posting online, dramatizing her pain, showing edited clips of herself, waiting for justice, completely unaware that every upload, every caption, and every comment was being monitored and archived under lawful cyber documentation. Randall coordinated quietly with the city prosecutor's office, preparing for a potential summons once all cross-verification was complete. By the end of the week, Peter called again. His tone was calm but firm. "Everything's in motion," he said. "From now on, say nothing. The next time you hear from the police, it won't be as the accused, it'll be as the witness." It happened on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of quiet suburban day when even the wind seemed to move slowly. Brent was getting ready to leave for work, half-knotted coffee mug still steaming on the counter. I was by the driveway, sitting in my wheelchair, while Mallory loaded grocery bags into the trunk. Everything was calm until Nina's voice cut through the air like broken glass. "My bag! Where is my bag?" she screamed from the living room. Doors slammed, drawers rattled, and within seconds, she was stomping down the front steps. Hair perfectly styled, but face twisted in rage. "You went through my things again, didn't you?" she shouted, pointing at me. Before I could answer, she charged toward the car and slammed her palm against the window so hard the glass trembled. "Give it back, you old thief." Mallory froze mid-step. "Nina, stop it!" she yelled, but the chaos had already drawn attention. Across the street, Mrs. Green from next door peeked out her window. A few neighbors came out onto their lawns. One teenager raised his phone recording, then another. Within moments, the quiet neighborhood turned into a stage, and Nina, always the performer, saw her audience. Brent ran out from his front door, alarmed. "Nina, what are you doing?" He tried to grab her wrist, but she pulled away dramatically, stumbling as if pushed. "You're defending her again," she cried. "Your mother went through my closet and stole my bag again. She's been trying to ruin me for months." I stayed still, my hands resting on the arms of my wheelchair. My heart was steady. I could see the reflection of her fury in the glass, the wild eyes, the perfect posture, the awareness of being watched. Every move she made was deliberate, shaped for the camera lenses now pointed in our direction. She was performing her grand tragedy, unaware that every frame of it would soon destroy her. "Mom, please say something," Brent begged, but I didn't. I simply looked at him, a long, quiet look that said everything words couldn't. Behind him, more neighbors gathered. Someone whispered, "Is that the same woman from the videos online?" Another answered, "Yeah, that's her. The influencer with the crazy mother-in-law." Phones kept recording. Nina turned toward the crowd, tears suddenly falling on cue. "I tried to love her," she sobbed, her voice cracking just enough. "But she hates me. She wants me gone." Then, just as her words filled the air, a familiar police cruiser pulled up at the gate. Officer Max Randall stepped out calm as ever, holding a folder in his hand. His eyes met mine briefly, steady knowing. The performance was over, and she didn't even realize it yet. The crowd was a storm of noise voices, overlapping phones, recording Nina shouting over everyone like a performer trying to control a stage that was slipping away. I sat still in my wheelchair, letting her chaos fill the air until it started to turn against her. Then, without a word, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The movement was small, deliberate. I tapped the screen, opened the photo Peter had prepared, and turned the screen toward her. The image glowed in the afternoon light, crisp, undeniable. There was Nina standing inside the jewelry boutique weeks ago, slipping a bracelet and a pair of earrings into my handbag while pretending to adjust my strap. Her face was clear, caught mid-action with the boutique's logo visible behind her. The reflection of that photo on the phone screen cut through the crowd like a blade. For a moment, even the wind stopped moving. A hush fell over the driveway. Someone whispered, "Is that her?" Another voice answered, "Oh my God, it is." Brent froze his expression blank as he stared at the image. His hand fell away from Nina's shoulder. "Nina," he said softly, disbelief breaking through every syllable. "What? What is this?" Nina's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face drained of color, lips trembling as if words might form, and then died on her tongue. The cameras were still rolling, the neighbors still recording, and the truth was now in everyone's hands, not as gossip, but as evidence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her steady and calm and said the line Peter had told me would seal the moment. "I've already sent this photo to the police, Nina, and they're on their way." The words landed like a verdict. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Some stepped back. Others exchanged glances, filled with pity and shock. Nina blinked rapidly, tears welling, searching for a way out that didn't exist. Brent turned away, running a hand through his hair, unable to look at her. The performance was over. The reflection of the phone screen dimmed as I locked it again. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not triumph, not revenge, but release. Nina stood in the center of her own lie, surrounded by the witnesses she had invited herself. And as sirens approached from down the street, the crowd parted silently. The truth at last had found its audience. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the last echoes of Nina's protest. Then the patrol car rolled to a stop at the gate, its blue and red lights flashing against the white walls of the house. Officer Max Randall stepped out first, calm and composed, as always, his notepad tucked neatly into his vest. Two other officers followed, professional and quiet, the kind of presence that instantly shifted chaos into order. The crowd parted to make way for them. Max walked up the driveway, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. "Mrs. Dalton," he greeted me with a brief nod. "Ma'am, we've received your report and the corroborating evidence from your attorney, Mr. Peter Sinclair." His voice carried the steady authority of someone who knew the full story before even arriving. I simply nodded. My hands were steady, now my heart no longer racing. Turning to Nina, Max's tone became firm, but still courteous. Mrs. Harrington Dalton, we've reviewed substantial material evidence, including surveillance footage, message logs, and a private investigator's report that directly contradicts your statement to the police. His words cut through the heavy air. Brent stood frozen beside the car, his face pale, unable to look at his wife. Nina took a step back, shaking her head rapidly. "What are you talking about? This is insane!" she stammered, her voice rising. Max didn't flinch. He unfolded a document from his folder and read clearly. "You are being officially summoned for questioning in relation to multiple charges. Criminal defamation, false report to law enforcement and assault, resulting in bodily harm." The words landed like thunder. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Nina's eyes widened, her mouth trembling. "No!" she whispered at first, then louder, hysterical. "No, I didn't do anything wrong." But the more she shouted, the more phones rose in the air, capturing her downfall from every angle. Max signaled to one of the officers who approached with calm professionalism. "Mrs. Harrington Dalton," he said, "I need you to listen carefully." His voice was firm, unyielding. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Nina's scream tore through the air. "I'm innocent. This is all a setup." Her voice cracked, desperation replacing defiance. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering to their phones as they live-streamed the scene. Brent finally spoke, his tone hollow. "Nina, stop," he said quietly, but she no longer heard him. As Max continued the Miranda warning, I sat still in my wheelchair, watching the scene unfold with quiet composure. Justice, at last, had entered the frame, not with vengeance, but with order, evidence, and truth. Within 24 hours, the internet turned Nina Harrington Dalton's world upside down. The video of her pounding on my car and screaming went viral, shared across Facebook groups, local forums, and even a few gossip sites that once praised her as the perfect daughter-in-law. The same woman who had built her brand on gentle smiles and inspirational quotes was now seen with wild eyes shouting accusations in front of horrified neighbors. The contrast was brutal. Comment sections filled with disbelief, then anger. "So fake," one person wrote. "All that kindness was just for the camera." Another said, "I used to follow her. Can't believe she'd treat an elderly woman like that." Meanwhile, Officer Max Randall contacted Peter Sinclair the next morning. The police had officially accepted my supplemental report, medical records, x-rays, and therapy documents from the staircase accident. It wasn't just another piece of paper. It was the missing link that turned two separate incidents into a clear pattern of abuse. The case now had depth, motive, and legal traction. Peter's voice on the phone was calm but resolute. "This is no longer a misunderstanding," he said. "This is criminal behavior, documented and provable." That afternoon, Brent came home pale, his phone buzzing nonstop with calls and messages from friends and coworkers. The man who once defended Nina at every turn now looked like someone waking up from a long, cruel dream. Mallory, who had spent months biting her tongue, finally stepped forward. "You kept saying Mom was exaggerating," she told him, her voice trembling, but strong. "You had no idea what she's done to both of us." Her words cut deeper than anger. They carried the weight of everything unsaid. Brent's shoulders slumped. He didn't argue. He couldn't. In the living room, Nina sat on the floor, mascara streaked down her face. Phone buzzing with endless notifications, articles, comments, videos of her meltdown. She looked up at Brent, desperate. "Please," she sobbed. "You know me. You know I'm not like this." But the truth was already too loud to silence. Brent turned his face away, his jaw tight, eyes glassy. "I thought I did," he said quietly. No one spoke after that. The air felt thick with a finality that didn't need words. For years, Nina had played the part of a saint, generous, elegant, adored. But in one afternoon, her mask had fallen before an audience of thousands, and as the last bit of sunlight flickered through the curtains, she sat there on the cold floor. The afternoon light was fading when the police car door finally closed. Nina sat inside, wrists trembling, face hidden behind her hands. The neighborhood that had once admired her was silent now. No applause, no sympathy, only the faint hum of cameras shutting off. Officer Max Randall stood by the open gate, his tone quiet but firm as he turned to me. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, "you followed every step exactly right. Because of your patience, the truth became impossible to deny." I didn't smile. My eyes drifted to the shattered glass of the car window, the one Nina had broken earlier. The fractured surface caught the sunlight, scattering it into hundreds of tiny reflections. For a moment, it looked like a mosaic, broken but glimmering. I realized that was what truth often looked like, sharp, painful, but the only thing that could let light through. Brent stood nearby, motionless, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what he'd refused to see for so long. He finally spoke, voice hoarse and full of regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry for not believing you." His eyes were wet, but I could tell the apology came from something deeper than guilt from awakening. I looked at him, my voice calm and steady. "Son, the truth doesn't need anyone's belief," I said softly. "It only needs to be proven." He nodded slowly, his gaze falling to the ground, as if searching for the pieces of himself that had shattered right alongside his illusions. Behind us, the officers escorted Nina to the patrol car. The blue lights reflected off the broken glass, flashing across the faces of the onlookers who had witnessed everything. No one spoke. Even the air felt still heavy with the weight of justice, not loud, not triumphant, just final. As the vehicle began to move, I exhaled quietly. The crowd started to drift away, one neighbor at a time, their whispers fading into the evening wind. Mallory stood beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. I turned to her, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the trees. "Do you see now, sweetheart?" I said, my tone soft but certain. "You don't have to shout to be believed. You just need evidence." And calm. Mallory nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, not from sadness, but from pride. The sound of the police car faded down the street, leaving behind only the quiet rustle of leaves and the echo of a lesson learned too well, that dignity once tested can become its own kind of victory. At the police station, under the pale fluorescent lights, I watched Nina sit hunched over the metal table. Her once perfect manicure tapped nervously against the surface, the sound sharp and rhythmic in the still air. The detectives asked her calm, routine questions, dates, messages, motives, but every answer she gave only dug her deeper into her own web of lies. From my seat in the waiting area, I could hear the muffled sound of her voice rising and cracking. Outside those walls, the world was already watching. The video of her screaming, smashing my car window, and calling me names had flooded every corner of the internet. Hashtags like #JusticeForKrista and #FalseAngel trended for days. The same woman who once called herself the voice of compassion had become a living example of hypocrisy. The next morning, her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, arrived from Chicago. I saw them step out of their car, pale and hollow-eyed, avoiding the reporters crowding the entrance. Later, I caught part of their statement on television. Her father, his voice trembling, admitted, "We spoiled her. We thought giving her everything was love. We were wrong." For a moment, I almost pitied them. Their words spread quickly online, not as a defense, but as a rare acknowledgement of guilt in a storm their family had created. That evening, Brent came by the house. He looked exhausted, smaller somehow, as if the truth had taken the strength out of him. "Mom, Mallory," he said, his voice breaking. "I owe both of you an apology that's long overdue." There were no tears, no grand gestures, just silence, and in that silence something mended. He told me he had taken a leave from work to attend therapy sessions with Nina as part of her court-mandated evaluation. "If she ever learns to change," he said quietly, "it has to start with truth." I simply nodded. I didn't want to feed his guilt. It was enough that he had finally opened his eyes. The next day, Mallory and I packed our belongings and returned to our old home in Cleveland Heights, the same two-story house with the tulip garden I had missed for so long. The moment we stepped inside, the air felt lighter, almost as if the house itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. That night, Mallory made tea, and I sat by the window watching the curtains sway with the wind. "It feels good to breathe in my own home again," I whispered more to myself than to her. Meanwhile, Peter Sinclair finished the last of the legal arrangements. With his usual calm precision, he filed every document needed to revoke Nina's authority over our family finances. The trust accounts were secure, the property titles reaffirmed under my name, every loophole sealed. When he called to confirm, his tone carried quiet satisfaction. "It's done, Krista," he said. "She'll never touch a cent of what's yours again." That night, as the Cleveland neighborhood grew still, I stood on the porch, looking out at my tulips, glowing softly under the light. Justice hadn't arrived with noise or fury. It had come quietly, steadily, and completely, surrounded by the wreckage of her own lies. That morning, the garden was quieter than I'd ever remembered. The tulips swayed gently under the sunlight, their colors glowing against the damp earth. I sat there with my cup of tea, letting the warmth of it rest in my scarred hands. The marks were faint now, just pale reminders of the day I fell down the stairs, or rather the day I was pushed toward an awakening I never asked for. Mallory stepped out from the kitchen, carrying another cup. She always makes tea the way I like it, strong but calm. She handed it to me and sat down in the chair across the table. For a moment, we just listened to the birds. Then she spoke softly, almost afraid to disturb the peace. "Mom," she said, "you've won. But do you feel lighter now?" I smiled, not the kind of smile that comes from joy, but from understanding. "Winning is easy, sweetheart," I told her. "But peace takes time." The truth was, I hadn't thought much about winning. I thought about the silence that followed. The phone stopped ringing with gossip, the reporters left our street, and the world moved on to newer scandals. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and free. On the table beside me lay my phone. I picked it up and opened the gallery. The photo was still there, the one that had saved me the proof that ended months of humiliation and doubt. It showed Nina, her hand halfway into my purse, caught by the store's camera. That picture had been my shield, my sword, my justice. For a long time, I just stared at it, my reflection faint in the glass. Then I pressed delete. Mallory looked startled. "Mom, you deleted it." I nodded. "Because I don't need to hold on to proof anymore," I said quietly. "The truth already did its work. The rest is for healing." She didn't say anything, just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I looked out over the garden, watching the tulips sway. A few petals loosened and drifted down, soft and weightless. For the first time in months, I felt the same way. I used to think justice came from shouting the loudest, proving yourself to the world. But now I know it comes from patience, from keeping records, from believing in yourself, even when no one else does. And maybe it also comes from letting go. If you've ever been insulted or falsely accused by someone you love, don't stay silent. Speak your truth, because sometimes justice begins with the courage to say enough.